Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris here, and I just finished watching the 3 episodes of the BBC miniseries that's available on Netflix, Dracula. And so, if you don't know anything about this, it's, as the description would indicate, kind of a self-contained, almost a movie. I mean, each episode in and of itself is about an hour and a half in length. So really, you're getting 3 movies. It's kind of a trilogy if you want to look at it that way. About Count Dracula, and it covers a time span, I think, from 1897 until present day. And so, obviously, sort of going into this, there's going to be spoilers that are part of this. If you haven't seen it yet and you want to go into it fresh, then I would suggest stepping away and then coming back to the review to see if you agree with my thoughts once you've had a chance to do that. But this is really, really excellent TV, especially the first 2 episodes. I do think the third episode stumbles a little bit. And doesn't quite stick the landing or the finale as well as I would have liked. And really, specifically, the last 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes or so, I don't think is quite as well done or quite as effective as it could have been, or as strong of a conclusion as it could have been. But overall, it's really, really great. And it's darkly comic, it's gruesome. It's kind of what you would want from Dracula. And, you know, I think everyone involved in this show did a fantastic job, and I think the casting of the characters are all great. And so this is kind of a different spin on Dracula a little bit. I'm not someone who is all that well-versed in all the Dracula and vampire lore that's out there. I've seen a number of vampire movies, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Last Interview with the Vampire, and a lot of different ones across the years, or over the years, including the one with Leslie Nielsen, Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was, of course, terrible, but maybe mildly entertaining. But anyway, this is, I think, a really easy thing to sink your teeth into. You see what I did with that pun there. If you have a Netflix account, and if you want to just carve out some time over the course of a couple of days to watch all of these, it's not sort of a huge commitment in terms of viewing, but the way it starts off and the way it sort of builds to this really intense situation where Dracula has someone visit his residence in Transylvania to draw up some contracts so he can purchase some land in England, and then go to England in the late 19th century to take up residence and to see and live in and sample, as it were, a new part of the world, is really great. And it's just really cool how that story kind of unspools. And there's really a handful of sequences in the series that I think work especially well. In the first episode, there's a scene where Dracula ends up at a convent where some nuns are protecting the lawyer that had gone to visit Dracula because he's been attacked, he's slowly dying, and sort of the rules of the beast, and I think that's the title of that episode actually, are kind of established, what works with Dracula and vampire lore in this universe within the show, and what doesn't, and a lot of it's sort of standard stuff that you would expect. Aversion to a cross, can't look in a mirror, can't enter a residence without being invited, that kind of stuff. But it's just really cool and really kind of gruesome how it plays out. Great special effects in the show. There's not anything that's overly crazy in terms of CGI. A lot of really good practical effects. And actually, a lot of the effects reminded me of The Thing, the 1980s Thing, the John Carpenter Thing with Kurt Russell. And they're really, again, kind of creepy and will really gross you out, but they work really effectively because they're tactile, the effects, and they're believable, right? So again, there's not sort of an over-reliance on CG, and it's minimal. A lot of it's sort of atmosphere and tension, but when the effects happen, they happen really well, and it's really good. And again, I can't remember the actor's name who plays Dracula, but he does such a good job in the role, and he's really darkly comedic and funny in that role. And really sort of his nemesis throughout the 3-part series is a nun with the last name of Van Helsing, and you can see sort of the lore playing into that. But the first episode is great. The second episode is also very, very good and takes place on the ship that Dracula is on, his book passage on, as he makes his way to London, or to England from Transylvania. And so it's got some really, again, some funny moments in it. And it kind of, for the passengers of that ship, turns into a whodunit sort of mystery as people start disappearing from the ship as he's feeding and sort of preparing to try and acclimate to English high society upon his arrival there, again, at the turn of the century. late 1800s. But then when you get to the final episode, that's when things get a little bit shaky. The ship crashes. Sister Agatha, the character Van Helsing in the show, works with the captain to sink the ship to try and keep him from making landfall and thereby terrorizing the whole country, as it were. But the coffin sinks and he wakes up 127 years later in 2019, I assume, or 2020, I guess, now. He's totally discombobulated and has to acclimate to what's going on or get used to what's going on in modern society. And it gets a little weird in the final episode because there's sort of a subplot that starts to develop with some new characters that are spending a lot of time in a club. And it's a little bit weird. And I don't especially like the very tail end of this episode. But overall, it works. And I think it pretty solidly rounds out things. But I don't necessarily like what they kind of reveal about Dracula and sort of his... assumptions about what his own limitations are within the final 10 to 15 minutes, as I'd mentioned previously. It just feels a little bit kind of not earned that in all this time, he's actually not, and again, spoilers here if you haven't seen it, but he actually can go out in sunlight and not be affected by that. That's something he learns at the very end, and it's just kind of a weird turn of events that doesn't really work as well as maybe some other alternative approaches to the conclusion could have worked. But overall, I would give the show a score of probably a 9 out of 10 just based on the merit of the first 2 episodes, which I think are outstanding TV. Some of the best TV, if you want to call it that, I've seen, because really they're sort of standalone movies given their length, their runtime in and of themselves. So absolutely, I think you should watch it, especially if you're a horror fan. Again, it is gruesome, so if gore is not your thing, there's some moments that obviously are going to involve that because we're talking about Dracula, but the sort of unintentional, or I guess unexpected, I should say, comedy of it works great. And so it's just a really great show and a really well-made show. So check it out. But if you've seen it, let me know what you think, and let me know what you think about the final episode because, again, I think that could have been handled a little bit better, but I'm curious if people have sort of a different take on that. So as always, thanks for watching. Have a great night, and I'll be back soon.